Before we get to the point of exploring and understanding the couple of key steps we need to take to gain control of what's going on between our own two ears, I would like to take a couple of minutes to explore what modern neuroscience has to say about what's going on between our two ears. We've been talking since the start of this series about focus and about mindfulness. And no doubt you will have come across the concept of mindfulness because much has been written about it over the last couple of years, unfortunately in such a vague way as to make it largely impractical for people like you and me who have to put bread on the table every day of the week. Mindfulness is an old Buddhist concept, so it's 2,500 years old. And it is basically about paying a deliberate and unusual amount of attention to what's actually going on non-judgmentally. In other words, it does actually involve disengaging our automatic pilot. Mindfulness in recent years has become widely acknowledged in the Western world as a means of treating various, what might loosely be described as mental conditions. I've mentioned before the University of Massachusetts Medical School because it was here in the 1980s that mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy was developed as a means of enabling people who had just been diagnosed with cancer alleviate the stress that they felt as a result of having been diagnosed with cancer. What was found was if you could get rid of the stress or indeed depression often associated with being diagnosed with cancer, you enhanced your survival chances sixfold. As a follow-on from mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy, the university developed a whole suite of therapies related to the treatment of a variety of different mental conditions. The particular one that I want to draw your attention to is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which has an extraordinary track record in the treatment of chronic depression. It is indeed proven to be 3 times more effective in the treatment of chronic depression than any other therapy, including all the drugs you can take. So over the last 20 years, we have discovered through a range of therapeutic interventions that mindfulness does something to the normal mind that enables it to step outside depression and stress and the noise in our own head. It enables us obviously tune into the here and now in a way that the normal mind simply cannot as a result of evolution. Neuroscience has explored this in some detail because in the late 1980s the whole process by which we actually pay attention was researched by a team led by a Professor Bailey in the United Kingdom, who came to the conclusion that there is a piece of our mind that at the very least coordinates conscious awareness or focus or mindfulness, although some people held the view that actually there was a piece of our mind that actually is the seat of conscious awareness. It's a little bit of an academic, nonsensical debate between two ends of the spectrum because, like most things in life, the truth is somewhere in between the two. What was discovered is that there is a piece of your brain, a piece of my brain, which colloquially is known in cognitive psychology as the central executive. Neurologically speaking, from a neuroscientific perspective, it is a piece of the brain situated here in the left prefrontal cortex. The brain's central executive's function is to ensure that in the moment, meaning now, I do just what I need to do to the very best of my ability to achieve just what I want to achieve. Now, that is in marked contrast to everything we've been talking about up to now, because that is a definition of focus. That's a definition of mindfulness. In fact, it's a definition of purposeful mindfulness because it has all the elements. I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm paying attention to it, and I know why I'm doing it. I know what my goal is. Neuroscience, therefore, has investigated at great length what is going on in our brains when we are trying to be focused. And what has been discovered is not very encouraging. What we have discovered is that this part of the brain, the bit of the brain that we most need to be involved in our ordinary everyday lives, is, after the age of 12, not involved at all. What we have discovered is that up to the age of 3, when a child is soaking in information, when a child is fully present in the moment, when a child is taking his or her psychological snapshots that form their personality, that form their view of the world and how to negotiate their way through it. Up to the age of 3, this part of the brain is fully engaged. Between 3 and 11 or 12 years of age, it is engaged in a diminishing fashion until after the age of puberty and the onset of adolescence, that part of the brain is no longer engaged in our ordinary everyday lives. Now, what has been discovered is that there are isolated incidents in which this part of the brain is engaged. Bearing in mind that this is the part of the brain that is in effect where conscious awareness is managed and takes place. This is the part of the brain that is in fact the place where we are mindful when it's switched on and mindless when it is, as it normally is, switched off. What has been discovered is, first of all, this part of the brain is switched on, it is engaged when we're learning as adults a complex new process. The research has actually been done in relation to people learning to drive a car, which involves all 4 limbs and our 3 primary senses. It's such a complicated task that our brain's central executive can't help itself but to get involved. Unfortunately, the minute we get it, the minute we understand how to drive the car, the minute it becomes habitual, this part of the brain steps back and is no longer involved. We've also discovered through neuroscientific research that the brain's central executive is engaged when we experience what the American Psychological Association calls a catastrophic event. Something that actually questions our ability to make it through the day. So, for example, if I were walking down Wall Street on Tuesday, the 11th of September 2001, and saw a plane flying into a building, this part of my brain would be engaged. It would have all of my attention. That famous attentional spotlight would suddenly be totally focused on the threat to my life. And unfortunately, I would take a psychological snapshot and I would end up suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. There are other circumstances which have been identified as times when this part of the brain is switched on, but they're not of much use to us. When we sleep, deep sleep, under general anaesthetic, and sadly, in the last few moments of life. Indeed, that is the modern neuroscientific explanation for a so-called near-death experience. None of these incidences are of any use to us because what we want to do is learn how to switch on this part of the brain when we want it. Because in the cut and thrust of ordinary everyday life, when we want to make that ordinary everyday life extraordinary, when we want to bring about change in our life, when we want to achieve our greatest goals, we need this part of the brain working for us, because otherwise everything is so difficult. All we'll do is muddle through. So, onwards and upwards towards the next video, where we will explore what neuroscience says about getting this part of the brain ready for action.